Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing development of our web application, incorporating what we learned about nested control structures to improve the application. Specifically, we're going to review what was the state of the application as far as the last version, which is version 7.1. We're also going to introduce a new construct called empty, which allows you to, is useful for form validation and making sure that data was provided to a form as needed. And then we're going to go over two new versions of our of our web application, version 8.0 and 8.1, which are going to use nested control structures to add some features. So first off, as we talk about 7.1, we added to when 7.1 we added some simple get input validation. And what we did was we basically just used the isSet method to check whether a particular get variable we were going to use was supplied or not. However, we didn't really go any further than that as far as validating that the data that was input was valid and was what we needed and was the right type of data. So that's kind of what we're going to expand on in this version 8.0. For example, in our checkout form, we're going to make sure that at least one item was selected in the shopping cart. And when we go to our thank you page, when we go to complete our order, we're going to make sure that the user provided all of the necessary shipping and billing information. Before we do that, I do want to talk about the empty construct, though. Basically, this is a built-in PHP construct that's used to determine if a variable is quote-unquote empty. And it's useful, as I mentioned, for processing form data to make sure that specific form variables or get variables were provided to a script and that they actually had a value. Basically what it does is it takes a variable in as its argument and it returns a Boolean value, either true or false, based on whether the variable is considered empty or not. So basically the empty function or the empty construct will consider a variable to be empty if it is, one, it has not been declared, which is kind of like the isSet statement, or if it's been declared but it has a value of any of these values. If it's equal to the empty string, the integer or float equal to 0, the string 0, false, null, or an empty array. So let's take a quick look at a script here called empty.php that shows the use of the empty construct. Basically, here we have a ternary operation, and we run the empty construct on the variable temp. As we just mentioned, empty returns a true or false Boolean value as to whether or not the variable is empty. As you can see up here, we've actually commented out the declaration of empty. So, the declaration of temp. So when empty runs on it, it should return false because because the variable hasn't even been declared yet. Because we know with the ternary operator that if this evaluates to false, the third operand is going to be output. So basically what this variable result does is it's our way of storing a formatted output of the empty variable, because the empty variable returns a Boolean value, and that a true converts to a string to a 1 and false converts to the empty string. If we just output temp, the result of empty temp directly, it wouldn't look that pretty. So actually what we're going to do is, based on whether empty returns true or false, we're going to set the output string result to be either the value true or false. So if we run this script with this variable temp not declared, and actually let's open a new link. And we go to empty.php, we can see empty temp is equal to true, and that's because we haven't declared the variable yet. So let's go ahead and, which means it's empty. Let's go ahead and declare it, but it still doesn't have a value. So in this case, empty should still return true because it doesn't hold any value. So if we go and refresh the page, we should get the same output, and we do. Now if we go ahead and set empty equal to 200, for example, it's no longer going to be empty because it's been declared and it has a value that's not equal to one of those empty values we mentioned. And if we save the script and reload it, we should now get empty is equal to false. However, let's say we go back and set temp equal to 0. or actually let's set it equal to the empty string, which is sometimes happens when users submit a form and don't provide any data in a text input field. So it's the empty string, which we know is one of the empty values considered to be empty by the empty construct. We should get now that this value is that the value of empty temp is equal to false. Is equal to true. So if we refresh the page, we can see, okay, temp is considered empty because it contains the empty string. So now we're going to talk about the changes we're going to make to version 8.0. As had mentioned, we don't have that great validation, get input data validation going on in 7.1. So we're going to add some validation to make sure that at least one item is in a user shopping cart. We're going to add that to checkout.php. To thankyou.php, we're also going to add some validation to ensure that any necessary shipping and billing information was provided. Basically making sure they provided a first name and a last name and all of the parts of the date except for the apartment number, because not everybody has an apartment number. And the validation, we're going to make use of the empty construct that we just learned about to make sure that, one, all of the shipping information inputs were provided, and also that they weren't left as empty. Because they might be returned as a blank, as an empty string, and so that would be considered is set. Is set would return true, but it would be considered empty because no value was provided. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to be introducing two variables: a Boolean error flag, and a flag often refers to just a Boolean variable that flags a certain condition, and then we're also going to define a variable that holds an error message. And we're going to add that to our three scripts: checkout.php, item.php, and thankyou.php. And what that's going to do is make our error processing more efficient. For example, when we find an error because a get value wasn't provided, or if a get value was provided but it wasn't validated as we needed. So let's go take a look at some of the scripts from this web application. For example, if we look at, this is checkout.php from version 7.1, which was our last version. If you can see at the beginning, it processes the get variable. It creates a short form of it. And then what it does is it goes right into, as long as the get variable is not null, which means as long as some items were the item's value was provided, it's going to go ahead and start calculating the total or the subtotal. Now, that doesn't really provide any validation to items, making sure that valid input was provided. So we're actually going to take a step further, because one reason is why bother calculating the total of a cart, for example, if the user did not add any items to their cart. For example, if all the items were selected quantity 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to add we're going to nest an if statement in here that's also going to check to make sure that at least one of the quantities is greater than 0. So if we go look at our new checkout.php in version 8.0, we can see we have the same processing of the get variable at the beginning. We can ignore this error section for now. We'll talk about that in a second. We have the same if statement that checks to make sure that cart items was at least provided, but then we've nested another if statement that actually has another test condition that must be met, and that says that at least one of the items in the cart, either 1001, 1002, or 1003, has a quantity greater than 0. And if that's the case, then it goes ahead and it executes this section, which calculates the total. If this condition is not met, meaning that all of the values were 0, or the quantity was 0 for all of the items in the cart, we're going to end up using this error code is actually going to output a message that says you need to add at least one item to your cart. Now what we've done up here is, in this data processing section, we've added two variables. We've added an error flag. We initially set it to false, and what that's basically going to do is anytime we encounter an error, such as a get variable was not passed in at all, or it was provided invalid data, we're going to set error to true. And then we also are defining an empty string, defining a variable error message and setting it to empty string, which is going to allow us to sort of create a custom error message that we can use to output. And basically the reason for creating these variables is because at different points in these nested if statements, we're going to have the possibility of generating errors. And let's say, for example, one thing that we do when we generate an error is we want to set the page title equal to error. Now, if we went down here and we did that every time we encounter an error, we'd actually have in this else statement, we'd have to write page title equals error. And then we'd have to also repeat that down here and do that for each error. And as our pages get more complicated and there's more error conditions, we might be doing this 4 or 5 times throughout a page. That gives us 4 or 5 times to have an opportunity to maybe misspell error. And we know that anytime we have code that is being reused over and over again, we want to see if we can, or is being used in multiple places, we want to see if we can reuse it by putting it in one spot. So instead of having these page titles here, every time an error is generated, we set error equal to true. In this case, it was true because the cart was empty. And then in this case, we're also adding an error message, a custom error message that says you must add at least one item to your cart before you can check out. Down here, this else statement corresponds to if cart items was equal to null, which means it wasn't supplied at all, so it was a get error. In that case, we just want to output what sort of our default message is, you have reached this page in error. So what we do is we don't need to define a custom error message like we did up here. We can just set the error value equal to true. And then once we're out of the data processing section, or towards the end of it, we've added a little section of code that's going to allow us to, for example, define this page title all in one spot. So basically it's going to, if error is true, meaning that an error condition happened, then it's going to define the title for the HTML title tag to error. And then what it's going to do is, if the error message is equal to the empty string, meaning that a custom error message wasn't set, because up here, for example, we set a custom error message, then it's going to output a default error message that says you have reached this page in error. Now what we've also done in our code is, in our previous version of checkout.php, when we got to the output HTML section, we just checked to see if our get value was equal to null. If it wasn't, we output the checkout form as to be expected, and then if there wasn't a problem, we'd say you have reached this page in error. Well, now what we're going to do is, instead of comparing it to whether cart items equals to null, we're just going to say, did an error occur? And if an error did not occur, we're using the not operator, then go ahead and output the checkout form as expected. Then we have an else statement that says, that's basically if an error did occur, to output the error message. Now, as we saw up above, the error message can be either set to the default error message, as in one of the examples, or a custom error message. By using this one error message variable to hold either a default message or a custom message, we can simplify this to one line of code down here to output our error message. So we also did this for thankyou.php. For thankyou.php, and this is the new version 8.0. As you can see, we've added this error flag and this error message variable to the data processing section, just as we had done in our new version of checkout.php. This is the same code that we had in version 7 that just tests to make sure that the get data, customer data, and order total were provided. But then we've added a nested if statement that's going to further validate our input. Basically, we have an if statement here that says it's only going to enter the if block, which is going to set the page title. In this case, it just sets the page title equal to thank you, meaning that there was no error. It's only going to do that if all of these conditions are met. Basically, using the empty function, if customer data's first name was not empty, and we say not with this not operator, and if their last name was not empty. And we do that for city, street, state, and zip code. The only one we don't include is apartment, because not everybody has an apartment number. So basically, we're only going to output the thank you message if the user entered all of the appropriate information, which is everything except for the apartment number. If not, the else statement, we're going to set an error, and it's going to say, set the custom error message, you did not provide all of the necessary billing and shipping information. And then this, here again, we're making use of this error message and error flag functionality by, if this section is reached, if neither of these get variables were provided, and that's just going to default the output error, which is you have reached this page in error. Here we have the same error processing section we did on checkout.php. It's going to set the page title to error in the HTML title tag. If no custom error message was created, meaning that error message is still equal to the empty string, then we say you have reached this page in error. Now again, when we get to our HTML output section, we test the condition, did an error occur? If no error occurred, then we go ahead and output the thank you message as we normally would on a correctly entered form. If not, we go ahead and output the error message, which would either be you've reached this page in error or you did not enter all of the appropriate data into the form. And we also had done this for item.php as well, in that we added the error messages, the error flag and the error message to process the error. In this case, the only error that occurs in this file is if the current item ID does not equal to null, because we're not actually doing any other validation on the item ID, whereas in the checkout we validated to make sure the cart had at least one item in it, and the thank you page we validated that all of the shipping information was provided. But we did update item.php as well. Close some of these down. So now to version 8.1, what we're going to do is we're actually going to be altering checkout.php so it not only handles the checkout or the requesting of the shipping and billing information that happens when a user says checkout from the view cart page, but we're also going to have it output the thank you message. So we're actually going to get rid of the thank you.php page altogether, and we're going to have checkout.php do that. And the way we can do that is, now that we have conditional control structures and have nested control structures, basically we're going to create a get variable called action that we can provide to checkout.php, and based on that variable we can determine what function we're going to perform and what we're going to output. So in our case, if the action variable is set to checkout, we're going to know that the cart was just submitted. We're going to calculate the total on the cart and then output the shipping information. The other option that we have for the action variable is complete order. So after the shipping information form has been output, and that form is loaded from the viewcart.php page, what's going to happen is checkout.php is going to submit the shipping and billing information to itself. So the action variable, the action attribute of its form tag is going to change, whereas before it forwarded that information onto thankyou.php. Now it's going to forward it to itself. It's going to append to that form an action variable that says complete order, and then it's going to know to say, okay, now I'm processing a thank you message, and process the data accordingly and output a thank you message. Basically all we're doing is taking all that functionality out of the thankyou.php page, putting it in checkout.php. And there's different schools of thought on this. Some people, this is a commonly used convention, or a common way of doing things, is by providing an action get variable to a script that lets it complete different actions based on what you've specified as the action you want completed. The other way is to just, instead of having multiple actions be completed on each page, where you conditionally output HTML based on the action that was specified, you can have one page just forward the information to another and onto another. So for example, viewcart forwards onto checkout.php, which would forward it on to thankyou.php. In this case, we're having checkout.php forward the shipping information to itself. And as you'll see in the advanced course, when we push things out even further, after you submit shipping information, then it's going to want to request, credit card information, for example. And we're going to have a different action for checkout.php that's going to allow us to process that as well. And so some people like doing each one on a separate page. Some people like having an action get variable that allows you to specify the different action all in one page. And the reason I'm showing it and doing it this way is, one, it can be useful, and two, it's something that's used out there often. And actually, as you'll see when we start introducing our own user-defined functions, these incredibly long scripts that we have, because we have, for example, if we have 3 different actions that occur on the same script, we have 3 different sections of HTML to output, and so that means we have sort of 3 if-else-if statements to go through. You basically have the content of 3 pages in one script. That can get kind of lengthy. When we create user-defined functions, it's going to make things a little bit cleaner, and there's not going to be so much code in all of these pages. So let's actually go take a look at the change that we made. This is our old checkout.php from the version we just did, version 8.0. And at the beginning, it has 1 variable that it processes, or one get variable that processes cart items, and then it does the check to see if it's null and to see if it's if at least at least one item in the cart had a quantity greater than 0, and then it outputs the HTML accordingly. Either outputs an error message or it outputs the shipping form. When our new checkout.php, we actually have a new get variable called action that we're going to process up here using our ternary operator. And basically what we've done here is, because now this checkout.php form is going to perform both the checkout operation and it's going to perform the thank you operation, it's going to be accepting not only the cart items get data when the action is checkout, but when we go to thank you, which is specified by the setting action equal to complete order, we're going to need to have access to the customer data and the order total, which is information provided by that shipping and billing form we want. So at the top of this page, we've added 2 extra short get variables. Additionally, when we get to our global data processing center, because now we have to do 2 sets of data processing, we have to process the data if a cart was submitted from viewCart.php and calculate the total, and if the shipping information was entered and now forwarded to checkout.php, we have to be able to process that and make sure that data was valid. So basically what we do is we create a set of if statements that look at the action checkout, look at the action get variable, and if it's checkout, it's going to perform all of the operations that were already in our checkout.php to begin with. It's going to check that cart items was not equal to null. It's going to check that at least one item in the cart had a quantity greater than 0. But we're adding another else if statement that's going to say if action is equal to complete order, which is means that checkout.php is going to submit the shipping information to itself. Then everything that was on that thank you page, all the data processing that was involved there, is going to happen here. So it's going to verify that customer data and order total were provided. And earlier in the script, we saw that we've added those those short get variables to our script. And then it's going to perform the same data validation that thankyou.php had provided in version 8.0, which is to make sure that all of the required fields for a shipping and billing address aren't empty. And then it's going to set the page title flag to thank you. You can see that we've used the same sort of error handling mechanism that we've done before, where we, if an error occurs, in this case, you did not provide all the necessary shipping information, it's going to set it to true, and it's going to set a custom message. And as you can see, in this code, because we have even more nested statements, there's going to be more errors situations that can occur. So we're going to have, make use. We would have a lot of redundant code if we output page title equals error in each error section. So now we kind of see the value of declaring this error Boolean flag and then the error message, because it allows us to put a simple message, error equals true, when an error is occurred, and that will note a default to the output message. Additionally, when we set it equal to true, for all the errors, when it reaches this error processing code, it's going to set the page title equal to error. So the other thing is we're going to add one more depth to the output HTML section as well. We have the same check as before if no error occurred. So if no errors occurred, okay, I'm going to output HTML as normal. But which HTML am I going to output? Am I going to output the shipping and billing address form to request the shipping and billing information, or am I going to output the thank you message? So if action equals checkout, then you output the checkout form, or the shipping and billing information form. If action equals complete order, which means it's completing the order and going to the thank you page, you're going to output the thank you message. And down here you can see that if neither of these occur, we're going to output an error message stating that, one, that maybe an action wasn't provided, or a correct action wasn't provided, or that the shopping cart was entered but it wasn't have at least one item in it, or that not all of the necessary shipping information was not provided. One thing to note is that in our earlier version of checkout.php, in our form that contained basically contained a table with text fields for our shipping and billing information, we had it the form action set to thankyou.php, so it forwarded all of that data to thankyou.php. Well, thankyou.php doesn't exist anymore, so we're actually going to change that value to itself to checkout.php. So if we look at checkout.php and we look at the HTML output section for that, we can see that we've changed that to checkout.php. Now, one other change that we've also made is because the checkout.php form now has an action variable that gets passed to it. When we submit data from the viewCart.php form, we also have to submit an action variable that says what action am I completing, and from the viewCart it's going to be checkout. So if we actually go and look at viewCart.php in our version 8.1, here's the form that outputs all of the item information. And if we look at the very bottom by the submit button, we've added a hidden field, and basically what that's going to do is pass an action to the checkout page, and it's going to say tell the checkout.php to perform the action checkout. And so that's how the viewCart communicates to checkout.php what to do. So for a homework challenge, basically, as usual, just want you to make sure you understand the different things that we have done in this code. It's definitely gotten a lot more complicated as we've added a lot more control structures, and especially nested control structures. So you're going to want to take a look at the code and make sure you're understanding how the flow of the code works. Essentially, like how now we have error validation. Input validation, that basically it nests everything one level deeper than before, because before we were just validating that get data was provided. Now we're validating that the get data is valid. So that gives us sort of two nested if statements, and the chance for two different errors. One error being you reach this page in error because the get data wasn't provided, or two, the get data you provided was invalid. So one of the things I wanted to make sure you understand is this empty construct that we've introduced. We'll be using that a bunch because it's used to process form data and make sure that form data was provided as needed. And then also just review the concept of basically sending an action variable to a script in order to get that script to conditionally execute sections of the code. As you can see in our checkout.php today, the action variable determined, one, what sort of data processing occurred at the top of the script, meaning whether you were processing the data for checkout, which would be calculating the shopping cart total, or whether you were validating that all of the appropriate shipping information was provided. And then also we use that to conditionally echo or to output the proper HTML. So if it's a checkout, we're going to output the shipping and billing form, and then if it's completing the order, we're going to output the thank you message. So that conditionally outputs the HTML. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.